Unspoken Issues.
What is going on, everyone? Jesse here. I just kind of wanted to step in and give you a little bit of an intro here to this episode as Chris Armstrong and myself jumped into a project to celebrate the 30-year anniversary of Image Comics. So this episode is an intro to what we're going to call 7 Founders, 7 Number Ones, 7 Days. What's going to follow is our discussion of the launch titles for each one of the Image books that came out from each of the founders. We're going to do a podcast today. Chris and I sat down and recorded for 4 hours, and we are going to spread that out over 7 days. Some episodes may be pretty short, and some a little bit longer than others. I break the ice with a little bit of a story because it just so happened on the day that we recorded this podcast, I went to an auction, a local auction in person, wasn't online, had the opportunity to try and win some Image comics. There was about 600 comic books there, all from the mid-90s till about the very late 90s. The bulk of them were Image comics. We then get into the intro for the project where we talk about the excitement of the Image launch, and Chris even put together a timeline. So here we go. Let's get into the introduction for our 7 Founders, 7 Number Ones in 7 days. All right, well, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Unspoken Issues podcast. Oh, wow. This one we're getting ready to do is actually something that I've been looking forward to for quite a while. We are in the throes of celebrating the 30-year anniversary of Image Comics. That's right. Image Comics launched. The first issue, I believe, hit in April of 1992. And to fact check me here, I've got Chris Armstrong, of course. He's going to be helping me out. So as April of 92, is that when Youngblood #1 hit the stands?
Yes, sir. April 16th, I believe, was the release date for Youngblood #1.
All right. So you and I had this fantastic idea to cover the number ones of the Image founders. So that is what we're going to do. But I told Chris Armstrong I had to talk about an experience that I had today before we get into our main episode, if you will. So I'm taking 10 minutes, and I am getting some stuff off my chest, okay?
Let it out.
Here it is. So, Chris, I sent you a message. I said, look, I'm going to have to be a little bit late. We're going to have to start this podcast late, probably because there is an auction that's going on not too far from me, like about half hour down the road. I've been going to auctions for quite a while. I've been to probably 2 auctions within an hour and a half from where I live that solely focused on comics. Auctions are held every weekend. There are people that are solely in the business of going in, just doing auctions and consignments and things like that. A lot of times when comics come up, the good thing is now with the advent of technology, it used to be you had to buy a paper and you went through and the auctioneer would list what was going on in the auction. But now with the advent of technology, there's an app out there called Auction Zip. You go right to that app, you punch in your zip code, you give them a range that you want to find your auction in and put in a keyword if you want to try and narrow things down. You can also set up email alerts for these auctions to let you know when one's around you. So if you're looking for like any auction that involves or has the word comic listed in its description, it'll send you an email alert and you can go to that auction. And I've had some really, really good success with some auctions. What's been going on here recently since COVID, clearly that affected the auction industry because, you're stuffing all these people into one big roof and they're all sitting there bidding on, you go to an auction, like the auction I went to tonight, there was probably a good 50 people there. And when the pandemic hit, that wasn't feasible. So they're starting to get back into the groove of things. But to the point of what I'm trying to make here is that a lot of times the auctions that you're going to around your area, if it involves comics, that's just like one of the many things that they're selling along with it, along with like the glassware and, all sorts of trinkets, all sorts of tools, just about anything you could think of. And then there's probably the comics. So this happened upon my search engine. You look at the description, big bold letters, lots of comics. I'm like, oh, okay. So you go into the auction, you look at the pictures. They will take pictures of stuff before, obviously, it's going to go on sale to entice people to come and see. And there's a lot of comics there. I'm seeing all these flats of comics, and I start looking, and this is so appropriate. So appropriate. It's like laden with Image comics. Okay? There are some Marvel comics in there. But everything is basically mid-90s forward. There was nothing I saw in the pictures that was
sweet spot.
Yeah, nothing was pre-1990 in there at all. I think the oldest thing I've seen in there was probably 92, maybe 93. This person had been collecting, and they collected a lot of comics around that time. They also collected a lot of comics that I collected at the same time, but that's neither here nor there, because when I go to these auctions, you can get things for really cheap. I'm talking like, I've been to auctions where I've paid, I think 7 to 10 cents a comic, maybe even less than that after it all shakes down. I did have it. I've got stories that I could tell you about the time I went and saw a Superman versus Muhammad Ali buried underneath a bunch of Bronze Age. It was buried, and I mean buried underneath a bunch of, like, Supergirl, the movie adaptation was in that same box. And I was like, nobody knows what they're getting. And I had the chance to get that. All right, here we go. Here's the auction note. So I get to the auction. First thing I want to try and pay attention to is how much are these comics going to go for, right? I want to know, are people spending like stupid amounts of money, or are they actually somewhat reasonable, or am I going to get these things? Can I kind of gauge if I'm going to be getting these things cheap? So, all right, you got about 40, maybe a little bit less flats. When I say flats, just imagine like a big box. Take the lid off that box and you put comic books in that lid. Okay. So there's about 15 to 20 comics in each one of these flats. So there's about 40 of them there. First lot comes up. All right. Hey, we're going to sell some comics, ladies and gentlemen. Come on down. It's choice out. Now, what that means is that you win the bid. You can go down there. You can look at the comics, pick whichever one you want. You can get that many at the price that you want it for. So if you wanted to buy all 40 at $10 a piece, you could do so. If you only wanted to buy one little lot at $10 a piece, you could do that. Whoever won gets the choice out. All right.
Yeah.
First lot, guy spends $20 a lot. All right. So he wins the bid at $20. I'm like, oh crap. These are going to be expensive comics. People are going to be dropping lots of money on these 90s comics, which blew my mind. He walks up there. He picks out 2. And they're just filled. I'm pretty certain what he went for was all of the 2 flats that had the most Spawn comics in it. So he probably got about 40 comics for $40. So he paid about $1 an issue, which is good. That's a good start out price. I mean, that's what you probably find easily at a comic book store.
Right.
But he only picks out 2 boxes. So we still got another 38 to go. All right. Second lot comes up. All right. What's the price going to drop down to? It sells at $10 per choice. If you want to get up there, you can. This guy ends up winning a bid, and he's an older gentleman. He walks up, and I'm like, oh man, let's see how much he's going to spend. He gets 2 boxes. I'm like, okay, this is good. These things are just going really slow, and the price is starting to drop. Right. All right. Next up, next round, bids one at $7.50, and I didn't bid. I'm staying back. Right. This guy gets $7.50 a box. He walks up, he picks 1 box. They're just going slow and slow. And at this point, I write in my notes, okay, I'm shooting for $4, maybe $5. If I want to bid at $5 a box, I'm going to walk up there, pick about, 10 boxes, spend about $50, get all the good boxes, and then watch everybody else just drop away. But here's what happened. They end up abandoning selling the comics for a while and going over and trying to sell these Dickens Village houses, which just drove me nuts. Because there's like 100 of them lining a wall. They would run a bid, somebody would win, and then they'd sit there and have to look through all of the ones, and they'd have to sit there and wait. Well, luckily, they were selling other stuff, but they weren't selling the comics. They were selling other stuff. So I sat there and waited. Finally, they come back to the comic. Another round comes up. First bid, or the winning bid, is at $10 a box. So we went from $10 down to $7.50 a box. Then we went back up to $10 a box.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is weird. Well, luckily, this guy just walked up there and picked 1 box again. So he gets 1 box for $10. And that's still a good price. Like I said, if he's got 20 comics in there, he's paying 50 cents a comic. They're bagged, they're boarded. Everything looks great on these comics, right?
Yeah.
So at this point, I write in my notes, I'm getting these comics at $3 a flat. That is what my intention is. I'm getting these at $3 a flat. I am going to, and whatever's left, I'm buying it all. So next round comes around, we're at $5. And an older gentleman wins the bid at $5. I hold out and I don't bid. And I'm like, okay, next round it's dropping. The trend is there. We're going down. We're going to get to $5, maybe even less. Well, this guy wins it at $5 and he goes up. I don't understand what he saw in these comics, but he must have seen something. He's an older gentleman. You never know. He's definitely older than me. And he goes up and he picks 12 boxes at $5 a piece. So he spends $60. He gets a fair share of comics. But there's about 22 boxes left on the table. And now it's my time to shine, Chris Armstrong. It is my time to shine. So auctioneer, all right, we're bidding comics again. So all right, how about everybody start me out at 10? So the auctioneer, I will give props to this auctioneer because he knew that where the price was, he wasn't stupid and started everything at $100 a box. He didn't do that.
Right.
He started to realize the trend, and he starts it out at 10. Nobody bites. Drops it down to $7.50 a box. Nobody bites. And I'm sitting there, dude. I've got my number in my hand, and I'm like, come on, drop her down. Drop it on down. $5 a box. I'm not moving. I'm not budging. Let's see if anybody else budges. Nobody budges. $3 a box. And I'm like, okay, put my hand up. I'm the only one bidding on these comics. So auctioneer, 3. Okay, I got 3. 4. Give me 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. Now, I don't know. Probably about minute 15 of trying to get a $4 bid. You're going to call it for the guy that already bid for 3 and just no. What happens, Chris Armstrong? Auctioneer holds out until finally man speaks up in the front. $4. Well, my instinct is to go, okay, I want to get these things at 3. I back off and I let this person bid. So I'm kind of looking around and then I see who bid on it and I recognize them. So immediately, as soon as I recognize who this is, I'm kind of aware of, what kind of business he's in. Uh-huh. I know this guy. I know what he does. It's a local furniture salesman. All right. And he also runs an auction house. And okay, the only thing that's left on this table, okay, I guarantee you, is just Image Comics. There's probably maybe 10% of the 90s Marvel that I'd seen in there, which was some Fantastic Four, some Captain America, all the stuff that happened after Heroes Reborn.
Yeah.
There was some Heroes Reborn stuff in there. All of these, a lot of that stuff was picked through already. It's just Image Comics sitting there. This guy has no idea who Pitt is. He has no clue who Supreme is. He has no idea who Bad Rock is. But this guy buys all 22 boxes for $4 a box. Spends $80, $90, gets about 300 to 400 comics. I mean, I am livid because this guy has no idea he has no idea, no clue what he has. No clue. I'm not saying it's gold. What I'm saying is that he doesn't appreciate this stuff. I know what he's going to do with it.
He's just going to try and flip it later.
I'm sending you a picture this Saturday of the auction that's coming up at his auction house. And I guarantee you those comic books are going to be sitting on his page.
Yeah.
He's going to turn around and flip them. I love the 90s comics. What are we here to celebrate? We're here to celebrate Image. We're here to celebrate 90s comics. But I will tell you that they aren't something that goes for a lot of money. Yet resale value on 90s comics.
Yeah, outside of a handful of key issues, which are few and far between in the 90s, there's just, not a whole lot of dollar value attached to most of that stuff.
I hate to say that, but I mean, you look at
sentimental value. That's a different story.
Oh, that's right. It's so close to my heart. I'm looking at these issues of Pitt, right? I'm going through, and there's a ton of issues of Pitt I would have loved to have had. From what I understand, this was somebody's collection. I hope they didn't pass away, but obviously that's usually what you run into sometimes at auctions. People will pass away. They've got a lot of stuff that they want. The family wants to try and they don't have any way of getting rid of that stuff, so they put it in an auction to try and get us liquidated as quick as they can. They want to get that cash as just back into their hands. I'd have to do some research. I really hope he didn't pass away, because if so, he was probably around my age, probably around our age, because he's collecting Youngblood. He's collecting. Yeah. I saw, Codename Strike Force, Strike Files. There was a run of Stormwatch. Just about any Image comic that you could think of was sitting there, at least from 93, 94 forward to about 97, 98. It looks like it's about when those comics cut off. But the guy that wins it, all he's going to do is try and flip those things. And I mean, I don't think anybody's going to buy them because they might. You never know. I mean, I once watched.
At best, he'll probably make his money back. And
right. He does. It's not. Here's the thing. Like, I could see him at his damn furniture store, and he's like, "Hey, you interested in this armoire? Oh, okay. Well, how are you interested in the Supreme #1? Well, all right. Well, I'll throw that in free." It's like, dude, you're not. You can't. It's definitely going to the auction house. That's the only other thing that I can think he's going to do with these things. Anyway, I was furious. Me and this guy had some run-ins before. I was at an auction. Now, I've never seen him bid on comics. I've never seen him do this. So there you go. That's my auction story. That's why I'm so frustrated. I mean, I would have loved to have come home. I probably owned. I told Evan, I said, dude, if I can get these cheap, I will give you my doubles, because I owned probably, I don't know, 40% of what was there. I would have loved to have got my hands on the Fantastic Four from the 90s that they had there. He had a big run of Captain America after the Heroes Reborn and the Avengers as well. The Spawn books were there. There was a Spider-Man Bad Rock, Grifter Bad Rock, some great stuff that I would have fit so well and would have been just almost like Kismet, that destiny, the destiny of how we've been celebrating Image Comics this week. Here I have the chance to make out, like, I've never seen comics like this in a very long time. Like I was mentioning earlier, auctions like this recently have been few and far between where I can find at least comics, the amount of issues being as much as they were at this auction. Usually it's like, I don't know, I got 5 issues of Sad Sack Comics. Okay, well, I'm going to pass. I'm going to pass on that. That's usually what you see at the auctions, but this one right here was special.
Yeah.
And anyway, man, if you ever get the chance to go to an auction, I highly suggest it. It's a fun experience. All right, let's get to the meat and potatoes of why we're here. We have come to celebrate the 30-year anniversary of Image Comics. The 7 founders each brought a comic to Image Comics, and what we're going to do is try our best to talk about each one of those first issues tonight. Now, I'm going to do the rundown here. I'm going to do the rundown of what we have on tap, and then to kind of give everybody an idea of what Chris and I did, we ranked these issues, one withstanding. So the first one we're going to cover tonight is Wetworks #1. I want to kind of just briefly go over what happens in that issue. We may talk a little bit about, Will Sportasio, and we're not going to include that in our ranking. We're going to include 6 books total in our ranking. That's going to be Youngblood #1. I'm going to try this by memory of release date as I list these here. Rob Liefeld's Youngblood #1, Todd McFarlane's Spawn #1, Eric Larson's Savage Dragon #1, then Jim Lee's Wildcats #1, then Jim Valentino's Shadowhawk #1,
yep,
and then Mark Silvestri's Cyberforce #1. Now, that is in order of release date, but what Chris and I did here was we did our own little rankings, and we're going to go from our least, hey, we all love the Image Comics, but we ranked them, so we're going from 6 to 1 as we cover them. So,
well, I was going to ask you, for one thing, were you on the Image bus when it left the station back in 1992?
It's later. It's definitely later. And when I say later, it's not much later, okay? Because Wizard, the Guide to Comics, was keeping me informed as to what was going on around the world of comics. Now, was I reading the comic news section in there? I mean, sometimes, but mainly I'm going back. I'm checking the prices on my comics that I bought, But I remember you start hearing what's going on with Image pretty easily in Wizard magazine, because they're definitely promoting or doing at least a good job of informing the reader that, hey, some of the big creators from Marvel just left and are creating or are going to be part of another company and a whole brand new comics universe. So I finally figured this out. This is probably about legitimately a couple weeks ago. For the longest time, and I even think I may have said it on this podcast, Youngblood #4 was what I thought my first issue was. But it turns out, if I'm going by release date, the first, and this makes a lot more sense for me, the very first issue that I bought was Pit #1. It makes sense because I probably would have wanted to get on the ground floor of something. I knew who Dale Keown was. I knew him from the Hulk. I remember his art. And again, the issue just jumped off of the it jumped off the shelf to me, and I was like, okay, I want to start there. So I grabbed Pit number 1, and I just remember looking through that and thinking, my gosh, this thing felt so different from what I was reading before. And then I think I bought a Youngblood issue shortly after that, like towards the end of the initial run in the first volume of. I don't think I knew anything about like the initial series of Savage Dragon, like the first 3 issue series. Had no idea about that until the ongoing hit. So, but anyway, I would say about 93, I'm jumping on, and it is one of the main reasons I felt comics were exciting again.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I took from it. When I was buying those Image issues, I was like, this company, this universe is something that I feel I need to pay attention to, and I don't want to miss anything. And I didn't for quite a while. I mean, I was buying Wildcats, I was buying Stormwatch, I was buying Savage Dragon. I wasn't getting a whole lot of the Extreme titles except for Supreme. Now, if a crossover hit as time went on, I was probably going to try and get all the issues in that Image crossover, such as or the event, Extreme Sacrifice, Extreme Prejudice, Shattered Image. We talked about the Wildcat Spawn crossover, Devil Day. So I was buying those issues. If I could get my hands on them, I would. And not to mention the company crossovers too, man. Batman Spawn. I showed you tonight.
Bad Rock Wolverine.
Bad Rock, which I didn't know existed until tonight when I saw the issue. I had no clue. I saw that tonight, and I'm like, I want to read that. Bad Rock Spider-Man. Oh, the X-Men Wildcats crossover where it was like going through the different ages, which was so anyway, was I on at the beginning? Close enough.
Right.
How about you?
Not really. I mean, kind of. I have these vague memories. I was 11 when Youngblood came out, number 1. I turned 12 about a month later. And I had a couple of friends that were into comics, and one of them, I have these vague recollections of him showing me this Youngblood number 1 issue, and I was like, this is just like a ripoff of X-Men.
Listen to you.
Yeah, I was really dismissive. And I was a hardcore Marvel zombie almost.
Yeah.
He was like, no, this is the guy that used to do X-Force. And I loved X-Force. I had X-Force number 1, 2, 3, whatever, which actually had not come out that much longer before Youngblood. And then he was kind of the one who clued me in. I think the first Wizard that I ever had was the issue that Spawn was on the cover, maybe number 13. So by that time, the Image stuff was already, I think, at least some of the issues had already come out. But my friend is the one that kind of clued me in. Like, he knew about all these Marvel guys going and starting their own company. I read Youngblood, and I was like, this is badass, actually. I was wrong. Right. So then I think I had all of the number 1s, as they were coming out. And I was lucky that I had an older brother who wasn't really into comics, but was kind of doing the speculator thing. He bought a lot of the early issues, and he would read them, but he was mostly buying them, with hopes that they would be worth money one day, I guess.
As we all do.
So, right, yeah. So he bought a lot of mostly Image stuff, for a couple of years, and then he kind of fell off of it. But while he was going to the comic shop getting stuff, that meant I get to go to the comic shop with him and get my own.
Right.
So I was kind of all over all that early Image stuff and stuck with it, for several years. So I wasn't like right there on the opening day, stuff, but I think probably before any of the other Image books had come out, I was ready for Spawn number 1 when it was released, and me and my brother were picking that up on the first day. So yeah, I was all about Image, and that was probably when I first started to realize, I like this artist. I don't just like Spider-Man, or I don't just like the X-Men. I like Jim Lee, and now he's doing Wildcat, so I want to read that too. And I was starting to notice the artists, putting names to the artists that I like, and eventually the writers as well. So yeah.
That's really cool. And I find that parallel a lot with these guys, with these creators, because I'm the same way. You start to realize how these creators set themselves apart, especially the artists, how they set themselves apart from what came before. And then you're remembering names, which, for me, I wasn't doing that either. At first I was like, okay, well, I like Jim Lee's X-Men. I loved how Todd McFarlane was drawing Spider-Man and Spider-Man villains. I loved it. So I would recognize those names. And then, of course, the unique art style, all of a sudden you're able to pick that out of a lineup real easy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've heard other people say the exact same thing. Not only did they herald in, this creator-driven company, but they knew what they had when they started this. They knew they had enough clout and enough, enough of a following, a fan following, that the fans would follow them where they go.
I put a timeline kind of together too, as far as like the creators kind of getting together, making their decisions to go off on their own.
Let's hear it.
All right, so my sources for this are
Rob
one,
Liefeld himself.
Well, that's one of them. I got this, and you've got a copy too, the official Image timeline.
That's right.
That Jim Valentino put together, and it was released a few months ago. And it's basically just a lot of images of covers and stuff, and promotional images, and then text down the side of each page with dates of, the day that the first issue was released, the day that this meeting took place, yada, yada. So one of my sources is that. And then I've also got Robservations, which is Rob Liefeld's podcast. He's had several episodes where he talks about the formation of Image Comics and stuff like that. Rob Liefeld's a guy who's divisive or controversial, whatever. I'm a big fan. I think you're a fan. Say what you will about him. The guy loves comics, and he was there, so he knows, as far as all this stuff.
Right.
So that's one of the other sources. So something that's interesting, the first thing I have here, which is the first thing listed in the official timeline, August 4th, 1990, Rob Liefeld and I think Jim Valentino, maybe Tom McFarlane, a few people, but definitely Rob and Dave Ulbrich, Malibu publisher. Yeah, Rob asked him about publishing their comics. And this is, 2 years or a year and a half before the Image stuff actually comes together. So I'd never heard that before. I don't think I've ever heard Rob mention that on his podcast. I'd never read it anywhere in any other interviews. It's not elaborated on in the Image timeline book. It's just, the first thing that's listed, and it's like a paragraph or whatever. So that's interesting. I guess he had talked to Dave well in advance. This is before, X-Force, I think, had even come out. So that's August 4th, 1990. A year later, August 9th, 1991, McFarlane's final issue of Spider-Man comes out, and then he basically retires from comics. He wants to do his own thing, this is something that was brought up on the Robservation podcast as well, that I didn't realize that Todd had taken like several months off. He didn't go straight from Spider-Man into Spawn. That's something that kind of he had to be kind of talked into. So he retired from doing Spider-Man. He got sick of Marvel, I guess. He was going to do these trading cards for the NHL, where he was going to he did a pitch and everything, and the NHL ended up passing on it.
I remember that story. Yeah,
it was going to basically be NHL trading cards with
like Upper Deck, but I remember this. It was like Upper Deck, but it was something different. Like, why would you want to be in the Upper Deck? Why would you want to be in the Upper Deck when you could be in the front row?
Right. So he was going to do pictures on the front, and then on the back was going to be his own illustrations of and like caricatures of the players and stuff. But they passed on that, so he didn't do that. So then September 13th, 1991, Rob is decided to do his own independent comic. It's going to be called The Executioners. Those characters would be repurposed or used in Youngblood, I think, as the Berserkers is what they're called in Youngblood eventually. But the ad is those characters as the Executioners. That ad runs in Comics Buyer's Guide, and then Marvel freaks out and basically says you can't do that because it's infringing on the X trademark for the X-Men line. So that's September. Then December 20th, 1991 is the date that McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee meet with Marvel's CEO, basically tell him, hey, we're leaving. We're going to do our own thing. He tries to get him to stay. He offers him the Epic line, which is a creator-owned imprint that Marvel uses from time to time. They were like, no, that's not good. That's no good. We're just going to do our own thing. I don't remember exactly when, but I'm assuming it's between them leaving Marvel and starting Image. But DC had offered Liefeld and I think McFarlane, maybe even Jim Lee, a deal to do some of their books. But Liefeld, basically, according to him on the podcast, they were not able to come to terms on the money. So they decided not to do that. And then Eric Larson has said that he had a Nova and a Lobo book for Marvel and DC, both like in the pipeline when he decided to do Savage Dragon. And then I guess those got pulled.
I would probably say they're Marvel and Marvel and DC were probably a little upset
Right.
about what was going on, and he's like, "Well, you threw your hat in with these guys. You're not getting anything from us." So not surprised.
Right. So yeah, Liefeld he's got McFarlane on board, and Valentino, Eric Larson. Jim Lee was the big one that they really wanted to get because he was like the biggest name, and he was kind of like the good soldier, I guess, for Marvel. They say so. It was a big deal to get him. He was kind of a coup. Once they get everybody on board, April 16th, 1992 is the day for Youngblood #1's release. 1.5 million copies, which was, I think, the record for most independent comics sold at the time. Yeah. Rob tells a story on the podcast about doing signing at Golden Apple Comics that day. Eazy-E showed up. Yeah. Right. And they got to hang out with him. Jackie Childs from Seinfeld, the lawyer.
Yeah.
I forget the actor's name, but he was there. He was a comic fan. This was before he was on Seinfeld, but he was a working actor, and so he got to hang out with him too. Then he got a call to be on the Dennis Miller show like that night because this big signing was on the news. It was kind of a big deal. And Dennis Miller was actually a comic fan. Like he was name dropping Jack Kirby, characters and stuff, apparently in the interview.
Nice.
Liefeld also says that Sean Patrick Flannery was supposed to be on the show, and he got bumped for Liefeld because he tells a story about being in the green room or whatever, and Sean Patrick Flannery's manager is really pissed because his client got bumped for some comic book guy that nobody knew who he was. And then in October 1992, Image #0, the coupon deal. Every issue that came out in October had a coupon, and if you collected all those, send them in, you get a copy of Image Comics #0, and that really drove the sales up that month, and it pushed Image to the #2 publisher past DC.
Oh boy!
Which was the first time any publisher had been 1 or 2 besides Marvel and DC, so it's kind of a big deal. But yeah, the release dates were April 16th, 1992 for Youngblood, June 4th for Spawn #1, which sold 2 million copies. July 3rd of 92 was Savage Dragon #1, which sold 1.5 million. I got conflicting dates on Wildcats #1 because it's not listed in the Image timeline book, but the date I have from Mike's Amazing World
was I grabbed mine.
August 7th, 1992.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find a sales figures number for Wildcats #1. August 13th, 1992, Shadowhawk #1 did 750,000. And then interestingly enough, before Cyberforce #1 is released, Brigade #1 actually makes it out before Cyberforce #1, which I did not remember that being the case. Just kind of a Youngblood spinoff almost. Okay. But yeah, October 8th, 1992, Cyberforce #1, it does 500,000 copies. So that's pretty much like the timeline for the first year of all the big stuff for Image.
I remember going down to my buddy's house and seeing Spawn. I think he had Spawn #1 sitting by his bedside. And this guy never hardly collected comics. He was a quarterback for the football team. He's not into anything nerdy like that, but he had Spawn #1.
For whatever reason, that was the cool book. I remember when I was late, I think I was maybe my sophomore or junior year of high school. This would have been 5 years later, 5-6 years later. And there was a new kid at our school who heard that I was into comics, and he was like, "Yeah, you like Spawn, man?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, he's all right." That's the only comic he knew anything about was Spawn, but he knew Spawn, and I think it was before the movie had even come out.
What a great time to be alive. What a great time to be reading comics. In 2022, comic books are so accepted. They are something that is definitely a staple of the pop culture that's out there. Yeah. Back in the 90s, they weren't. You still had Spider-Man. I shouldn't say that, really. Everybody knew who Superman was. Everybody knew who Spider-Man was. But was it cool to be a comic book reader? We're not at that stage yet in the 90s. It's not widely accepted. I can't go up to the cheerleader and say, "Hey, you want to go watch the Spider-Man movie?" I'm going to get laughed at. So, but
this was actually probably around 2002. So I was out of high school, living on my own at this point, and I went on a date. We ended up coming back to my house, and I had a framed X-Men poster on my wall. And the first thing, as soon as she walked in, "Oh, you are into comic books." Just like that. Not like, "Oh, this is cool. You're like comics." No, it was like, "What the dude, you're a grown man. Why is this on your wall? That was her tone.
And that's like 10 years after Image dropped. I mean, it's been a long, hard road, folks. It has been a very, the good thing is that we've always knew the nerds of the world were going to run things anyway. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's why you have your film universes, of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the DCEU. It's because nerds like us have finally gotten to power and we have taken over.
I don't know if you've seen Multiverse of Madness yet.
Yeah, I have. I got to see that last week.
That just made me think. I'm looking at this official Image timeline cover where it's got it's basically a collage of covers of classic Image books from the 90s in current stuff like Jupiter's Legacy, Invincible, stuff like that. It just makes me think I want to go to the universe where 30 years later, all the Image creators are just like Eric Larson, and they're all still doing their books, and it's all still an interconnected, Image universe. Because in the early days, like we're going to talk about, I think every issue.
Yep, I know exactly what you're going to say right now. Yes,
I think every one of these number ones they mention Youngblood. There were crossovers, between all these books in the early years. But now Image is more like. They're doing stuff like Department of Truth, Saga, stuff that I like.
They're not popping in each other's books. That's not happening.
Yeah, they're all like their own independent stories, which is, it's great. But it started out as a superhero universe because that's what the creators were coming from. That's what they knew. It's expanded into all this different stuff now. But I would love to see what these guys would be doing and what this cohesive superhero type universe would look like if it had evolved over 30 years. Marvel did over,
Spawn is at what, 300 and something now?
Spawn is still going. Savage Dragon is up to 250 something, 260 something.
Right.
Youngblood has had a bunch of different series, in and out. Cyberforce pops in. Every once in a while, these books. There's a new Shadowhawk coming out later this year. These things come. They come and go. Over the.
What we ain't getting is a Wildcats.
No. No. And we're not getting Youngblood anytime soon because Liefeld doesn't have the rights to it anymore.
Yeah. So Bailey mentioned that, and I must have missed that episode, but who's got the rights to Youngblood?
He made a deal years ago where he gave up the right, some kind of business deal where he gave up the rights. But he's always still been involved until it changed hands recently, like in the last few years. It's changed hands to a guy who's didn't want his involvement, I guess. And it sounded like a shady guy that was trying to basically make comics so he could make movies, thinking it would make a lot of, I don't know. It didn't make a lot of sense, but yeah, he's not involved. And I'm not even 100% sure if that guy still has the rights, but I know Liefeld does not have the rights to it anymore.
Wow. Yeah, it would be a crazy universe to see all that, man. To see actually the 7 founders still around, still together, still making their own creations and actually trying to. I would have loved to have seen the expanded part of the universe. And if they could have just, what a neat thing it would have been to have the Image cinematic universe.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That brings this episode to a close, but make sure to come back tomorrow and catch us as we count down our personal rankings of the Image founders' number 1 issues from their respective launch titles. Who will be number 1? Don't miss it.